So quickly, we move on to the second section, which has to do with the importance of integrated research during epidemics and its challenges. We have three distinguished speakers on this section. By the way, my name is Daniel Sugun. I work with IRWA Specialist Teaching Hospital in Nigeria as public health consultant in the Department of Community Medicine. So today we have three distinguished speakers on this topic in session 2. And they have 10 minutes to speak, each of them. And then hopefully at the end, we have 20 minutes for questions. So the first speaker today is Francesco Vairo. He's Director of the Regional Infectious Diseases Surveillance and Control Service in Rome, Italy. If he's on with us, he has the floor now, Francesco.
Yes.
10 minutes. All right. Please note your questions in the Q&A box. At the end, we'll take them. Francesco, you're welcome.
Thanks a lot, Danny. Thanks, Sarah, and all the organizations, so the Global Health Network, Chatham, and Mboera, and mostly the African CDC. So thanks for giving me this opportunity. Just one thing, may I share my screen instead of, because I've changed a little bit the slides, so is it possible? I mean, I had last minute change of slides, so if it's possible, otherwise I will just go on speaking on the other version. Okay. Is there? Could you confirm the? Thanks. Perfect. So the title of the session is quite complex and is quite actual. I mean, that's what we are facing during the last 2 years of this pandemic. So I'm quite happy that that's the first presentation of this session. So just to introduce a little bit why actually we need to conduct research during outbreak. So first of all, we know that one of the main actually aspects of an outbreak, even if it's a well-known pathogen, is that it's a period of great uncertainty, and this could be managed by actually being prepared to respond to the outbreak. On the other side, trying to collect as much information as possible on a certain characteristics of the outbreak, which can then help actually to allocate our resources to try to drive actually decision for a public health response. And the other point, another important point, is that the research during outbreak actually is not just, I mean, groundbreaker research, or let's say clinical trials, new drug developments, new vaccine developments, but most of the most useful research, which then drives actually, which can actually bring to more actually, how can I say, to more complex researches it starts already with what we call the epi-investigation of an outbreak, which is not actually only the collection of data, but it's even applying some research concepts to the investigation, and try to reveal a little bit which are the main characteristics of the ongoing outbreak. So I should say that, let's say, during an outbreak, research, data collection, data analysis, lab analysis is actually a moral obligation of all the stakeholders involved into the response of the outbreak, in order then, as we were saying, to drive public health policy, and also to drive future research on development, for example, of medical pharmaceutical countermeasures, for example. So this actually, the role of research during outbreak brings then some questions which are somehow related also to some ethical aspects. So one of the first questions is, what is the appropriate role of research during an infectious disease outbreak? And more or less we have already answered to these. I can just say again that we have actually a moral obligation to conduct research to reveal which are the main characteristics of of the outbreak in terms not only on characterizing the pathogens, but how the outbreak is spreading, which are the more at risk groups, which are actually non-pharmaceutical countermeasures that can be applied. So this means also that together with what we can call clinical or epidemiological research, social research should be also a component that we should be prepared for and should be fastly activated during outbreak. The other main challenges during an outbreak is that some circumstances actually surrounding the infectious disease outbreak can affect the ethical review of research proposals. Before we were talking about the difference on this, but let's say that the circumstances could be quite challenging because we are not prepared, and this is something that we have seen all around, more or less all around the world during the pandemic, even here in Europe. To set up then ethical committees and fast track reviews and so on was quite difficult. Somehow also with there is actually, so first of all is being prepared, and being prepared could be also, for example, to develop some more generic protocol. One of the main example on this is, for example, the WHO, the first few hundred protocol, where actually it's a protocol that can have like a pre-approval of a research committee, ethical committee, and then going on with adapting it during the outbreak, fast at the beginning of the outbreak. The other problem could be then the process of informed consent research during an outbreak, because and this is something that relies mostly then with the involvement, for example, of the community and with knowledge, trying to can I say ensure that there is always a nice and good communication to the population, to the communities, and their engagement with the outbreak. This is something that again we have experienced during the COVID-19 outbreak, where having the let's say the compliance of people to lockdowns has been something very very challenging. So in this case, one of the points for the third question, one of the good point is the good information and the involvement of the community. Then we go a little bit more technical on what is the methodological design. Here, one of the key aspects is that even if we are in an outbreak, even if we are in an urgent situation, we should always be very, very strict on the choice of the study design we are going to apply, no matter it is too complicated or not, but it depends on the objective that we have during the outbreak. So then the very actually strict methodological, strict study design should be applied. Now, how research can be integrated in a broader outbreak response? This is something that, again, I feel that this kind of seminars, these kind of webinars, and these kind of trainings are quite key, because one of the answers to this question is that actually we should have the knowledge of research in the outbreak response team, or whoever stakeholders around public health is involved in the outbreak response. Now, one of the other keys of what I want to do here is now then focus a little bit on not on the let's say not on complicated studies during an outbreak response, but just on what actually we do at the beginning of the outbreak and why research is important. So usually what we have at the beginning of the outbreak, we have some kind of data from surveillance, which are already there. But even for surveillance, this brings some other questions. So surely the surveillance data is something that systematically collected. It depends then on the quality of surveillance, and this is another aspect that should be taken into account while doing research using surveillance data. The other thing is that the other good question, the other important questions is how actually the surveillance activities should be subject to ethical review. You know that this is something that is not so homogeneous across countries. But actually the surveillance data used for public health response. So in this case, there is no need for ethical review unless actually we have unless we added information to the key information that, I mean, to the necessary information which are routinely collected. The other question is where actually the surveillance stops and the research begins. So this is, I think, another key question. So the point here is that whatever is being used under actually the surveillance, that whatever information is collected strictly for surveillance activity should be then actually used to inform, to do research on that, so to apply some research tools on that and try actually to inform the population, the community, and the public health stakeholders and the decision makers. Whatever actually information is collected, apart from the one already, the necessary one already part of the surveillance, should be then actually should be collected only upon the signature on informed consent. Here again comes then what informed consent should be, and actually the importance of the communication, the community engagement for trying to expand the surveillance and comes to a research activities. Just next slide, these are questions trying to, let's say, give some reflection for the discussion which follows the presentations. Just one example is something that we have done with Mboera, where this was an outbreak in the Republic of Congo. Here, what we have done is with collaboration of all stakeholders in the country, was to try to use the surveillance data again and try to having the pictures of the outbreak itself. Here we have just the epidemic curve with some results, which has bring some actually key points for the policymakers. First, why I'm calling it research, because apart from the analysis of the surveillance data, there was actually, we tried to cover all the aspects of the outbreak, trying to define the outbreak in terms of time, place, and person. So trying to understand where actually the pathogens was coming from, trying to understand which was the infectivity of the behavior of the mosquito, which were the mosquitoes involved, and now actually, well, if there were some vulnerable groups or some risk, some group at risk into the population. So it comes here that what we found was that the population was actually was aged. Let's just to give you an example. The age of the population was older than the one that was in the previous outbreak. This was maybe one of the important things, because actually it relies mostly with the behaviors of the population, as well as the higher proportion of females. Well, actually they have more activities in the surrounding of their home, for example, and this was one explanation. So this gives you some important actually information on which to target during the outbreak. A deeper analysis was about the sequences of the outbreak. 2 new mutations were actually found into the outbreak, and you see, looks like that there was actually a change in the pathogen sequence during the outbreak itself in country, and not actually mostly an introduction from outside. So this gives another information that maybe the outbreak and the pathogens, in this case chikungunya, was circulating in the sylvatic cycle for years, actually from 2011 to 2019, with a change then in the mosquito population going from Aedes aegypti to Aedes albopictus. But just to give you here an example on which the research can bring down and say, okay, if the sylvatic cycle should be addressed, then maybe the focus should be there to avoid actually future outbreaks. This is just the tree, but this is an example. I don't want to go in details of this. These were the sequence of the chikungunya, which were part of the sequence of the chikungunya, which is circulating in that area with specific mutation that gives us some information to then try to prevent future outbreak. this was actually the infectious bites. This was a model that was applied to the research. So here, this is quite an answer of some of the questions that I was posing at the beginning. So the utility and the use of research during outbreak, at the beginning of outbreak, just to answer some simple questions, which then can bring actually the very key elements in the response. The experience in this case was, as I was saying, the surveillance data are there, but most of the time they have a quality which is not enough. So this is something that should be always addressed in preparedness plan of the countries, as well as research, as we were trying to answer to one of the questions in the first slide. That's quite a successful story also of a One Health approach for a chikungunya outbreak and a South-North collaboration. So I hope that with this, in 10 minutes was quite difficult to describe the study, but the questions are there, and we are trying to reply to some of the questions. Someone have already been replied. And like this example, there are a lot of examples that can be taken into account on how research can be key for an outbreak response, but at the same time brings some challenges which are not only in preparedness, but also during the response. For some circumstances, they are part of the outbreak itself. So with this, I just close here. Hope I am in time. Thanks to all the collaborators which were involved in the research, and to Pandora and to the organizer. Thanks. How can I do now?
Thank you very much, Francesco. That was fantastic. I see a couple of questions already in the Q&A box for you, but I guess we'll take them at the end of all the presenters. Okay. So the next presenter now is Gershom Chongwe. Hope I got that right, from Zambia. Gershom is the director of the Tropical Diseases Research Center in Ndola, Zambia. By background, he's an epidemiologist in medicine and public health. So if Gershom is here with us, can you please start your presentation now? Gershom, are you there? So while waiting for that, maybe Francesco, can you see some of the questions in the Q&A box? You can respond to some of them already.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So one other question is, to what extent does the European community rely on research conducted in Africa and by Africans? I won't put actually this in this way. So as in Europe, actually you have strict selection criteria for research institutions, which is the same that is applied by the European community in Africa. So based on the experience, based on the presence of experienced people and persons, based on actually on the expertise they can bring, based on the availability, or actually on the I can say not the reliability, but on the possibility of actually conduct research. So I can see that there is a difference in the reliability to African researchers or to African institutions. It depends how actually the African institution and how the countries have involved or actually develop the research capacities there. So there is no main difference in between. I have lost a lot of grants because the institutions where I was working here in Europe, they were not actually able to carry on some of the proposals that were actually submitted, or because there were institutions which were more experts in some sectors. How do you see the ethical? Just stop me when we are ready. I mean, I can go on.
Yeah, just go on.
So the ethical issue of web-based data collections during outbreaks. It depends on web-based data. Usually, most of the web-based data are anonymous data. They are actually part of cumulative numbers. So in that case, actually, the ethics is not that much needed. Another way is to use actually the web-based data if we are thinking or using like the social networks, the social network data, and there actually the ethical issues can come out, which actually are mostly on the confidentiality of the data. This can be done by anonymizing the data and trying to use them in a cumulative way.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we can go on and then we can come back to
Thank you so much, Francesco. Gershom has joined us now. So you are welcome.
Can everyone hear me?
Hopefully, I think you just
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. My apologies. I lost connection just when I was about to start talking. So my name, I was already introduced. My name is Gershom. I'm based in Zambia, Ndola, Zambia. I'm the director for the Tropical Diseases Research Center. I'm also affiliated with the University of Zambia School of Public Health. I'm here to talk about the importance of integrating research in epidemics. And this is very topical now because we are going through a pandemic. So I have a few slides that I will share. So we are going through a pandemic, and any pandemic poses serious challenges to the population that are involved. And there are significant threats to the well-being, the livelihoods, the environment, the economy of any country that is in an outbreak like we are in. Unfortunately, as researchers, we frequently have to do research, or we have to answer some research questions. And the only way you can do it is through conducting research during that same emergency. So you can't suspend research until the emergency is over, because then you won't be able to have the answer. So integrating research in the epidemic setting is inevitable. What then is the role of the different players in this situation? We have public health authorities, we have research ethics committees, we have governments, we have researchers, and they all play different roles. And so my approach will be to talk about the roles of these different players. So when you talk about public health authorities, of course, their primary role is to control the emergency and mitigate the impact of whatever is going on. So they want to prevent disease transmission and minimize illness and death. But whilst doing that, they have an obligation to involve the community in order to make sure that the community understands what is going on, and they call on the control efforts. Without that, without collaboration with the communities, their control efforts will not work. And in order for them to successfully collaborate with the community, they must treat the community with respect, with fairness, with understanding. They must understand where the community is coming from, what they value, and so on. Those are important things that they must do. But the public health authorities must also do something to facilitate research whilst doing their control efforts. And so by doing that, they give a chance to the researchers to answer their research questions. And by facilitating research, they also provide a chance for the researchers to provide certain answers that may be necessary for the response, to move the response forward. The only condition, I think, here is that the research should not interfere with control efforts. So if the research is going to interfere with control efforts, it shouldn't take place. Of course, the research must be responsive to and sensitive to the local norms, the traditions, the cultures of the people. And so it must involve the local leaders at all the stages. So in a nutshell, that's where I think the role of the public health authorities lies. What about the research ethics committees? Here we have a group of people whose role is very, very important in protecting the well-being and the welfare of the public as far as research is concerned. In an emergency situation, it doesn't mean that just because there is an emergency, then independent review must not take place, or we should not, research protocols should not undergo review. The review should be just as rigorous as before the research. How are you going to achieve that? If there is no capacity, maybe there is a need to think outside the box and involve more people, or get help from experts from outside the ethics committee to help with the review. Whilst ensuring the rigor of the review, there should still be, people should keep in mind that the research should scientifically valid, should be scientifically valid, socially relevant as well. So they have a role in preventing harm, promoting good, protecting the rights and well-being of the participants. The ethics committees also have a role, a very big role in making sure that they promote justice, but by ensuring that the benefits and burdens of research are distributed equitably. And that means that they must make sure that whatever the results of the research are made available to the research participants. For example, here, through emergency use of interventions, by allowing that whatever has been shown to work is quickly made available to the participants and the communities. Basically, the research ethics committees will continue doing their role. What about researchers? Researchers share similar roles with the ethics committees, but in addition, they also bear a responsibility of making sure that they don't get in the way of the response. So if conducting research will take away resources from saving lives, if conducting research will take away resources from, in terms of staff, equipment, in terms of other things that are required for response, if that is how, that's what will result, then the research should not take place, as I said. But apart from that, researchers also need to be able to, should be able to adapt their methodologies to suit the situation. Of course, whilst ensuring scientific validity. An example, there's been a debate in the research literature about the use of certain research designs, adaptive clinical trials, for example. They are said to be more suited to certain research, to research during emergencies. So those the kinds of designs should be considered. There are also certain research outcomes that can easily be done by changing the traditional way of collecting data and collecting it through, for example, internet-based platforms. Again, that is where possible. This will, of course, raise certain concerns regarding the privacy, transparency, and how the security of that data. And so that needs to be taken care of as you are designing the research. There must be fair selection of participants, minorities, vulnerable groups, not to be excluded without justification. Of course, there has to be respect for persons. We need to deal with the challenges of ensuring that the consent is valid. Remember, this is an emergency situation. So you have potential participants that are vulnerable, maybe due to the disease severity or powerlessness or impaired decision capacity from the disease, from that emergency. And the time for the consent process is limited. So you have a very narrow therapeutic window. So you may find yourself in a problem, how to get valid informed consent. And the debate, of course, is heavy in bioethics about how to do this. But I've offered here two ways in which this can be mitigated. You can get consent through a waiver, of course, that have to go through an ethics committee and approved, and then you that is implemented. Or you can get surrogate consent from a legal guardian, from a parent, from a spouse, and so on. These are just a few of the examples. To continue here, you also need to make sure that the research only proceeds if the study intervention is safe and efficacious. How do you protect participants given their inadequate knowledge about an emerging disease like we have had? I'm sure we all remember when COVID-19 was starting, there were quite a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding, quite a lot of unknowns, and we kept on going because we needed to understand the disease. We didn't know whether it was airborne initially. We didn't know whether masks, which masks were okay, whether cloth masks or just ordinary surgical masks or N95 and so on. There was quite a lot of information at the beginning, which was unknown, but we kept on going. The idea is to use the best available information at that time, and you keep going, keep collecting information, keep on researching. You also should be able to deal with therapeutic misconception. Because of the situation we are dealing with, we have a lot of misunderstanding from patients who might think that the care you are giving or the research you are doing is part of the care. And so as a researcher, you should be able to do, to be ready to deal with that. You should also be able to be ready as a researcher to share the data. Share with whom? Share with public health authorities in order to, once you do the research, you share the data with the authorities so that you can aid the response. You can provide evidence to move the response forward. But you should also be able to share the data with the participants, share the data with the communities that you're dealing with, and of course, your colleagues, the researchers, fellow researchers. So all these are things that you need to do as you are dealing with an emergency. I want to end by giving some examples of what happened here in Zambia when we had as a response to the COVID-19. So initially, because I work for a research institution, so this is from the perspective of us as a research institution and what happened to our research. So the government issued restrictions, general restrictions for the general public. So no movements or reduced movements, gatherings that were restricted, And this greatly affected our research activities in the research institution. We had to suspend some research projects, but after a few weeks and after information was lent by the authorities, the research regulator in Zambia, who's they are called the National Health Research Authority, issued some guidelines. Of course, so they said, of course, we are suspending most of the research activities which have where you have to have direct contact with research participants. But if you must continue, you must submit to us, and this is quoted verbatim from their communication, a description of the risks of exposure to COVID-19, which will arise from your undertaking or from your research, and how you intend to mitigate those risks. So it was a matter of sort of submitting this information, describing the research activity, describing the risks we thought were going to arise, and permission was given. Within a few days, we were given permission to restart most of our research activities, particularly clinical trials and all those that we were planning to suspend. So this is an example of the national authorities adapting to a situation and finding a solution to allow research to continue. In addition, the National Ethics Board also took up the role of reviewing all the research related to COVID-19. You have to remember that we have a lot of ethics committees around the country, but to avoid duplication and delays, they requested that all the research that is related to COVID-19 should be reviewed by one body, so that researchers don't have to move from one research ethics committee to another. There was one ethics committee to do all the work. And I think that helped us move things along. I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gershom, for that great presentation again on the importance of integrated research during epidemics and the challenges we get from that. The third speaker is unable to join, so that gives us more time to respond to some of the questions and to discuss further this very, very interesting and exciting topic. Please, Gershom, there's some particular questions in the box that I want you to look at. Then I will come in for Francesco. There was one particular addressed to you. But first, let's take the one for Gershom, which says, what benefits and opportunities did we Africans miss because of not having research ethics? What benefits do we Africans miss by not having research ethics?
Yes,
What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the session before was actually explaining a lot about this. I don't feel that because not having our research ethics, I feel that it's something that it's not proper. So there are research committee. We have seen the presentation of our colleague George about the research actually agency in Zambia. So there is actually a constellation of research committees which are all institutionals or at the national level in every country. The problem is there then even if actually the process is accomplished and administrative process is accomplished, then it stands also on the ethics of the researcher itself, and we have seen a lot in the presentation of Dr. George about this, because actually from one side, and we have seen before during the presentation of the bioethicists, that actually the administrative process can be fully accomplished, but then actually how the results are applied could be ethically compromised. So I won't say that there is not research ethics in Africa. Is there? Is developing, and I don't want to enter now in the bioethicist questions, but the 3 sessions before were quite clear about that. So there is a need also to an adaptation of these, but then the ethical principle remains the same as we have seen also in the 3rd presentation in the session before. So I won't say that there are missed opportunities because maybe there should be more actually an increase in the research cultures into.
That's great. That's great. Gershom, do you have something to add to that?
Not necessarily. I think that he has explained it very well. We have something. It's not like we don't have bioethicists, or we don't have ethics frameworks that really. Maybe we need to strengthen our ethics committees and be more very deliberate about identifying what really constitutes African bioethics. I enjoyed the discussion earlier, but I think we cannot say that we do not have it. It is there, the framework is there. I think it just needs to be built on.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, Gershom, there's this question which I want you to respond to. Are there instances where results have been compromised, maybe for self-motives? And so how do you handle that? Are there instances?
Results compromised for what?
For self-motive. For self-motive. I mean, for your own self-interest.
Oh, yes, there's always the self-interest is always a possibility. And so it can happen, and it can happen anywhere. Someone might want to falsify or do something because, of course, they are looking forward to something like the next grant or a promotion, or to make a big name for themselves. So that is always a possibility, and the impact is devastating if it happens, because it may lead to people making wrong decisions based on those wrong results, and so we need to mitigate it and prevent it from happening from the beginning. Unfortunately, it is human nature, so it's not possible to
I agree with you.
completely do away with it. You just have to hope that you are dealing with respectable people with integrity.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Mboera. Sorry if I didn't pronounce very well. Maybe Francesco, you can respond to this. As one health research work, how do we compromise biomedical research ethics in animal and human?
Yeah, the question is quite difficult to read.
Is it clear?
Okay. No, but the concept of One Health is bringing us in, as I was also giving some, even in the example I brought. So what we tried to was to combine actually during the early phase of an outbreak, some actually human research, there was mosquitoes, and there was also applying a second phase, even some animal research, trying to find out the circulation of the pathogens in the symbiotic cycle. So, and the pathogens and the mosquitoes. So there is a lot about the ethics in animal research. This is something that usually is addressed here, for example, in Europe, is addressed by specific ethical committees on the use of animal samples and on the use of animals, because actually here the issues are different. So is ethics in the use of animals for pharmaceutical experiments and whatever, and then the use of data from animals actually to inform on the pathogens and circulation. So that's quite a different aspects of the ethics in animal research. I totally agree that there should be actually that the two actually approach should go together for most of the pathogens we are keep on seeing, and we will see even more about this during the next future. So zoonotic pathogens which will jump to humans. Surely the expertise of who is working in animals and who is working in humans regarding ethics should be actually a little bit compromised. We cannot have, I mean, completely different ethical committees. Maybe the ethical committee should always, at this point in time, should always involve always among their members some of from the vet side or from the animal side. But the answer is that there should be a compromise. There should be a compromise on trying to reinforce the ethical committees. And because it's needed, because one of them, I mean, the approaches to any outbreak will always, I mean, I think in the near futures will always, as was it before, will always involve the animal side.
Thank you very much. Then there's one more question from Baba Sani from Kano, Nigeria. Gershom, maybe you respond to this. He said, plus for field researchers that must operate in the farmers' fields, for example, how could someone make it possible while in epidemics? For field researchers that must operate in the farmers' fields, how could someone make it possible while in epidemics? I know if you can, but Gershom, if you want to take a go at it.
I'm not sure I understand the question about.
Yeah, I think the guy is talking about during epidemics, you have to do some work in the farm. Probably
how can you make, how
yeah,
can you
yeah,
operate in
exactly.
a field
yeah.
During an epidemic? I think
During epidemic,
the
yeah.
principles are still the same. I mean, you have to understand the epidemic you're dealing with and know how to be able to collect the required data whilst protecting the participants. I think that's how I would answer that. I mean, okay. I said earlier that if conducting the research will result in harm to participants, or you will be in the way, then perhaps you shouldn't. But if there is a way, you have to find a way of collecting your data without burdening the response, without interfering with the response. If you can do that, it doesn't matter whether you're collecting data from a farm, or from a hospital, from wherever, or from a market, as long as your research will not interfere with the epidemic response, I say you should still go ahead. So protect the participants, get appropriate PPE, and so on, and then you can.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As we begin to wind up, I don't know how much time we still have. Francesco, how do you see ethical issues using web-based data collections during outbreak?
Yeah, this actually I tried to answer before the presentation of George. So I think that could, I hope I have answered in a good way. So that was already answered.
Okay, thank you very much. Then maybe Grace Allison from Zambia says, in case of research carried out, there's a case of research carried out in Zambia. The presence of the national ROB facilitated the conduct of research during the epidemic. In countries where there is no national ROB, how might researchers proceed? Gershom, how might researchers proceed if there are no national ROB?
Where there is no national IRB, well, I think that there are still international norms on how to conduct research. Where there is no national IRB, perhaps you can still go with the institutional IRBs and get permission from there. And in the absence of institutional IRBs, perhaps the local authorities, the local public health authority should be able to give you permission to do research. But it's still absolutely important to get permission and not just go out there and do it without anyone looking at your plans, without anyone reviewing what you want to do.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question in French, which I think, Francesco, you speak French? I can't pick that.
Not that much. I don't speak French. I can understand.
Danny, I can help.
Okay.
What he's asking is, he's asking, how do you take into consideration the interests of people with mental health diseases within a research study, for example, with autism?
Mm-hmm. That's a big issue. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, the problem with autism, it's a very, I mean, it's a key problem because there are, I mean, in case of autism, it depends also on the syndrome. So if the person is legally able to take decisions and so on, so he doesn't need a moral person to actually to consent. Then it depends how actually the mentally ill person, I mean, what's the condition in terms of clinical condition, legal condition of the mentally ill person. And then based on that, you can ask, you can inform and then ask the consent to the person to participate to the research. So it's really the clinical condition that brings down actually the legal condition of the person, and then based on that, actually there is, you can apply the different. So if he needs yes or no, a moral person or a tutor actually to consent or not to that.